awkward period of time where we're not sure we're live. It looks like we're now live. Kelly, welcome back.
Hi, Scotty. Long time no see.
Indeed, I know 2 weeks. It feels like a long time. Though you and I have, a couple of other ventures that we're working on as well. We'll announce here at some point in time. But for anybody who might be watching today, and I'm not actually watching the feed quite yet. I'll be getting to it here in a second. I'll put myself on mute, but for anybody watching the feed on LinkedIn, thanks so much for joining us. This is LinkedIn Live. Obviously, my profile is how you got here, but I'm Scotty John. You are watching also Kelly Sanchez, my biweekly conversation partner here on these live events. We, per usual, have an open forum for any questions you want to ask to experienced recruiters. So please feel free to pop those questions into the comment section. However, our theme for today is actually going to be on technical assessments. When I say technical, I just mean for any role that there's some technical aspect. So we'll kind of get into what assessments are, how we think, what are the best practices for administering them, and then finally kind of how best to prepare. So Kelly, welcome.
Hey, hi.
And so if you want to maybe start with our little exercise, buy me a little bit of time here to go find the feed, make sure that I can watch it and get the comments, but also, not have a bunch of crazy feedback here. So I'm going to mute myself and I'll be right back.
Sounds great. All right. So this is your first time watching us. I have this deck of cards. Basically, they're conversation starters. So I just asked a question while Scotty is being IT, trying to figure out if we're live and going. So let's see what question we have for today. What do you like most about each of your siblings? Can I pass on this one? I don't really like them. I'm just kidding. I love my siblings. Gosh, I don't even know what I would say. So as the oldest sister, I feel like I'm always protecting them. But my brother, what I like most about him is he has the biggest heart and he's so creative. His background is graphic design, so he is just a natural at it. And I can appreciate that. And then I have a sister and she is the baby. She is sassy, she is loud, and she will speak her mind. And we both love getting our nails done and are girly girls and like to go shopping. She's my favorite travel partner. So yeah, those are my two siblings in a nutshell. Hopefully they're not watching this.
They would be, wouldn't they? I'm sure they watch every single time.
Yeah.
It's easy for me. I have one sibling. I have a brother. I think in terms of my favorite thing about him, it's pretty straightforward. We're similar in a lot of ways, but in terms of the career paths we've taken, totally different. So he's a professional ski patroller in the winter, and in the summer he's always trying to figure that out. But most recently, he's a full-time employee up at Solitude Mountain Resort here in Salt Lake City, Utah. He's got an avalanche dog named Lumen. And so basically what I like most about him is I don't want to say his job. That's not fair to him, but just the fact that, he's kind of he's living the dream, so to speak, and doing something that's pretty cool for a number of reasons. But so I guess just the fact that he's adventurous, and a lot of the stuff that I do in the backcountry, whether that's skiing or in the desert or otherwise, is, facilitated by him. So anyway, that's a good one.
Yeah, it was.
Awesome. So again, like I mentioned, for anybody who's watching on the live stream, which is kind of funny, I'm not sure why, but can't tell right now how many people we have. But I do know we're live. Please feel free to pop any questions you have in at all. But again, we are focused today on technical assessments. So Kelly, let's start with just a high level. What are assessments? What are we referring to when we talk about assessments? And yeah, let's start there.
Okay. So technical assessments. So that is, I would say, either an assignment, questions, or I want to say exam, but it's not really an exam, but something that is given to the candidate for the particular position that they're applying for. So it could be IT specific, marketing, finance. I feel like all industries have something specific that they are going to test you for to see where your skills are at for that particular role.
Sure. And some industries are more, these are more prevalent than others, right? So for instance, where I focus in IT recruiting, software development in particular, but generally a lot of different technical roles, it's pretty prevalent, especially now, to see a technical assessment. You're also seeing that in finance, correct?
I am. Yep.
And where else? Anywhere else that you feel like they're pretty prevalent, or is it kind of hit or miss after those two?
I feel like on the marketing side, they'll ask for like your portfolio or like writing examples, blogs, any type of material that you've put together or content, is what comes to mind for me.
It's interesting, isn't it? Writing samples. We don't necessarily think of that as technical, but especially, they're like when it comes to marketing and copywriting, it is down to a science. So, all right, cool. So I think in terms of, again, what we want to discuss today, I think the biggest thing that we want to talk about is, two different sides to this. One is the administration of these assessments and kind of some best practices around that. And two would be how best to prepare. We both have opinions on these. Yeah, right. So we can maybe talk a little bit about that too. And once again, for anybody watching, if you have questions or experiences with assessments, we'd love to hear your comments. Feel free to just put them in the comment section of this live feed. But otherwise, yeah. So what would you say, Kelly, are, in your experience, some of the best practices around administering these technical assessments?
Mm-hmm. So I would say it's definitely at the beginning of the interview process. For me personally, is a good way to administer. And I'll give an example. Say you have a position that's open and you receive like 100, 200 applicants. It's able to help you shortlist when you're able to assign an assessment, because the ones that are really interested in the role will take it. The ones that aren't won't. But then also, once you review the assessment, it gives you a good idea of where their skill level is at for that particular role. So that's why I say at the beginning, because towards the end, you've already interviewed them for like culture fit and other things, but then at the very end, it's like maybe they didn't do so hot on that test, or maybe they did and they aced it. You just don't know. But I think just from a recruiting standpoint, it's a good place to start to gauge who is interested in that role.
Yeah, that's a really good point with regard to gauging interest. To your exact point, especially when you're talking about applicants, as opposed to people that were kind of going out and proactively seeking for a position, but especially when you're talking about people who've applied. I hadn't honestly thought about it, but I agree with you. It is in terms of best practices, doing it at the beginning of the process makes a ton of sense, but that reasoning is not necessarily something I would have thought of. To your point, I think what I think of when I think about doing it at the beginning of the process is to make sure that it's a good use of everyone's time, right? There's a baseline for knowledge needed in this role. And so, let's make sure we get the people who pass that baseline into the rest of the process. The other thing that I would mention in terms of a best practice, this might feel needless to say, but I have to tell you, I think it doesn't happen as often as we'd like, especially on the recruiting side of the house. Making sure that your team has taken it so that you can get that baseline.
Yeah.
And, you might determine that a particular assessment, we won't be naming any names here in terms of brands, but you may determine that a particular assessment, that you thought was going to be great, it doesn't do the role justice because your top performer doesn't do that well on it. And if they're your top performer, don't judge them based off of the assessment, judge them based off the work product, right? At the end of the day, again, perhaps needless to say, but sometimes I feel like we forget the whole purpose of this process is to determine who's going to be the best fit in the actual job. Mm-hmm. So making sure that your internal team, and ideally in my mind, the hiring manager themselves, have taken the assessment to establish what that baseline looks like. And also, determine, okay, maybe this assessment isn't that good. It's too academic or whatever the case for this particular position. And we need to keep looking and find a better one.
Yeah. Or customize it, like if there's certain questions that you like that work and they don't, to your point. Yeah. If there's everyone that's failing this one particular question, maybe take it out because it doesn't align with what you're looking for in the company for that particular skill. So
totally.
Yeah, good perspective.
Any other best practices around administering assessments? I did a little research. I can speak to you. I mean, we don't want to get too in the weeds here, but I can speak to a couple of other things that might be important and not necessarily thought of. But do you have anything else before I jump into some of that stuff?
Go for it.
Okay,
I'm sure I would be thinking those items once you say it. I'd be like, oh yeah, that was my idea.
All my best ideas started with yours, Kelly. So no, I would say, a couple of considerations that maybe you aren't thinking about, because again, the whole purpose and for most of us is, okay, let's make sure that this person has the right, the requisite knowledge for a given role. But the other big thing I would say is ease of administering, right? That it sounds to me like, based on some research, some surveys that have been done by an independent organization, specifically rating these assessments, the ease of administering is a really big piece that is not necessarily thought of up front. So how easy is it for you to send? How easy is it for the individual on the other end of it to take? That's another big thing that you will want to try to determine before you say, okay, this is the one I'm going to go with. And again, I think the only other thing is we've already covered is making sure that it's applicable to the actual job. Just because you're administering a SQL assessment doesn't mean that it's going to be, focused on what your team is working on in SQL day in, day out, or, Excel, for instance, if we're talking about finance. All right. So once again, just like to pause in the middle since we're live to make sure that anybody who's watching today, thanks again for joining. You're with Scotty John and Kelly Sanchez. I didn't introduce her properly at the top of this, but Kelly is the head of talent acquisition at DigiCert. She and I do this every other week, and we're talking about assessments, but really it's anything you want to ask to experienced recruiters. If you have a question, feel free to pop that into the comments section. All right, nothing yet. Kelly, moving on. So when it comes to preparing for the assessment, beyond, your day-to-day and essentially actually having the experience you say you have, right?
Yeah.
Which is, again, we would think needless to say, but you never know, right? So beyond that, how do you recommend, or do you have any recommendations on the best way to prepare to take one of these?
That's a good question. I would freshen up your skills. Like Google is a good resource. Friends that have maybe been in the role, ask the recruiter, like how technical is this technical assessment going to be? Or when I think about writing, like go to that company's website, get a feel for their culture and their page, because every writing style is going to be a little bit different. Some companies are very fun and positive. Other ones are going to be a little bit more rugged and structured. So you'll be able to see kind of the writing style, for example. So when you're making that writing assessment, cater it to that company. Like if you were working there. Yeah, that's all that I can think of.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a perfect start. I think if there was anything, I just want to, I'd say it's not the most productive comment we've ever had on one of these lives, Kelly, but our mutual friend, JG, Jeff Gardner, wants to know if Scotty, which is of course me, is any good at fantasy football. I just like to say, let the record show. I'm not gonna talk about it. but let the record show, my league that Jeff happens to be in last year. I just want to know, like, Jeff, you tell me where did I rank when we were done? And I'm curious where you ranked too, if you're willing to share. Express a little vulnerability here, sir. Anyway, honestly, I have no idea where he came in. And I'm not going to say where I did. I think everybody can probably guess. All right, we did get a good question here. So what do you think of assessments that have to be done within a certain time frame? So for example, 24 or 48 hours. And then a follow on to that, what do you think of timed assessments? They have to be finished within for instance, 90 minutes. Thanks for the question, Mark.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a good one. I think it depends on when the recruiter is giving you the time assessment. If they're sending it to you at the end of the day at like 5 p.m. and they expect you 24 hours, for me, I want you to present your best work. I think 24 hours is a quick turnaround, but maybe 2 to 3 days, 72 hours gives you a little bit more of a gap to really prepare, do your best work. Because I know if I got that and I had plans, or, we all have our lives, we have dinner, we have families and everything to do. So after I put everyone to bed, do my thing, now I'm going to do this assessment at 11 p.m. in order to get it turned in tomorrow because I have a job. Yeah, I would think an extended time is probably the best, but from a recruiting standpoint too, we're also trying to gauge your interest as well. So we're not going to give you a week per se, but if there really is a deadline, 24 hours, and that's what you got, I would reach back out to that individual and say, hey, this is life. This is what I have going on. Can I extend it? Or let them know, transparency, because we don't know what's going on. And I would say that they would be more open to accommodate that. Anything you would want to add, Scotty?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right, and that is the thing about that's the challenge with regard to assessment. So I'm glad it sounds like we agree, just to be clear, about the fact that there should be a deadline, but that maybe 24 hours or even 48 hours is a little bit of a tight turnaround. Mm-hmm. The reason that I think that there should be a deadline associated is pretty simple and probably not thought of often. But if somebody's interviewing multiple places, and again, if it's a person like a finance professional or an IT professional who can expect assessments in almost every process they go through, they're going to prioritize the assessments that do have timeframes. So if you have an open-ended assessment, it's like, hey, take this whenever type of thing. And it's never positioned that way. It's just, here's the link. But if it doesn't have a time frame associated with it, it'll inevitably go to the back of the list because you have these others that get prioritized ahead of time because they are timed, right? So I agree with you that like a 24-hour turnaround, especially once, again, you go back to a proactive, like somebody that your group reached out to proactively as opposed to applied directly, 24 hours is tight. Yeah. But I do think that a lot of times we're thinking about the individual and their life and their full-time day job they currently have and their kids and everything else that they have going on. And we're not necessarily thinking about the other positions that we're up against when you're effectively competing for this talent. So putting some sort of a time frame, I think, is super important. In terms of the timed assessments, this one, I would say for me personally, I'm torn because here's what I think. I think that there are people who are good at taking tests. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're, the smartest or even the most knowledgeable individual, right? There are plenty of people out there who are extraordinarily smart or knowledgeable, they know a lot, but they're just not good at test taking. They kind of freeze up, right? And the assessment can, in some ways, be create a little bit of PTSD from our, standardized test days back in high school where everything was timed. And again, those tools are important they do show something, but maybe imperfect in terms of really assessing, okay, is this going to be the best person for this particular job? I get that. Yeah. Everybody has to operate under timelines, but does anybody really have to operate under a 90-minute timeline? I don't know. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm torn on it as well. But the biggest thing from time assessments that I will say is give yourself that time. If it's like an hour assessment, hour and a half, like make sure you're scheduling that in and doing it. Because a lot of times when they do come through, you can see that they were on their phone or got disconnected or they were watching, they're distracted. So that's not going to give you the best results. And unfortunately, that's going to come through on our end. Yeah. So if you are doing a time assessment, like make sure to ask the recruiter and confirm, hey, is it an hour, is it an hour and a half? And really set that time aside and focus on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that, to your point, that's, perhaps for a lot of people that feels like a no-brainer, or like I've mentioned before, needless to say, but it really isn't. It's super important. It's kind of akin, I think, to some of the basics around interviewing that people don't always think of or keep top of mind, but it's absolutely true. You want to schedule that time. You want to make sure that insofar as it's possible that it's interrupted time. Right. So great question, Mark. Thank you for that. And JG, thanks for deleting your comments. So now no one's going to know what I'm talking about when I'm referring.
Oh, he is calling you out.
I know, right? By the way, for the record, I was first in the league last year. I'm going to say it after all, because he's not. And in fairness to him, that was probably a fluke. First in the league, first time in like 15 years or something like that, however long we've been doing this.
Anyway. I'll just say beginner's luck, but it's not even beginner's. Like, you've been doing it for a couple of years. Never mind. I take it back.
All right. So I'm going to leave the next question we got to close us out. It'll be the last question. So Beals, better stick around to be sure that you hear the answer, or Kelly's answer. Because I think you already know mine. But for anyone else who's watching this right now and curious to know any questions around technical assessments, how best to administer them or how best to take them, feel free to drop those questions into the comments section. Once again, this is Scotty John you're on my LinkedIn, so I'm sure you know that, but Kelly Sanchez, head of talent acquisition at DigiCert, my biweekly conversation partner for these open ask me anything questions. So I think we were speaking a little bit about how best to prepare to take an assessment. I think we should just wrap up there. Then we can address Chad's question. Chad, please don't delete it so people know what we're talking about when they watch this later. But so in terms of how best to prepare, we kind of talked a little bit about it. And you mentioned, study it a little bit, right? Brush up on some of the basics. Also ask, I think such good feedback is ask other people that are doing the job, what are the things you should prepare for? Because regardless of what the topic is, there's almost an endless amount of questions that could be asked. And if you're not using a particular function in Excel in your day job, or, if you're not frankly speaking, I'm not technical enough to know, but I would imagine that SQL is going to look a little bit different when you're querying out of a SQL database versus an Oracle one, right? So try to understand what to expect, asking the recruiter. It's super basic, but what can I expect and what should I prepare for this assessment? And I think that just the only thing I would add to that is this, again, you don't want to necessarily think about this as this is what I do in my day job every day. You want to think of it a little more broadly. They're kind of typically what we see are these assessments are more broadly focused. Sometimes you could argue almost academic. And so to your points, I'd just say, make sure that you're not thinking about it in terms of, okay, this is what I do with my day job, should be good to go. It's actually, no, I need to actually spend a little bit of time. And you mentioned it earlier, Kelly, Google is a really, let's be honest, most people in our day jobs use Google a lot. I saw on a resume, professional Googler, and thought that was one of the best bullet points I'd ever seen because,
That's
that
great.
matters.
It does.
All right. So I would say we can pretty much wrap it up. Again, if there's any additional questions, feel free to pop them into the comment section. Looks like we did get one comment, and I really appreciate the comment, Chad. Thanks so much. So we'll address your question real quick. I'm gonna let Kelly answer it because I'm biased, but Kelly, who's funnier, me or Chad Beals?
Oh my, I knew it. I knew this was going to happen. So from the poll that I took, the winner was Chad Beals.
Well, see, I think the only way for me to prove I'm funnier is to say something funny right now, and I got nothing. So I guess it's been determined, Beals. You're the funnier and the younger of us. Congratulations, my friend. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Again, we are every other Wednesday at around 11:30 Mountain Time. We go live. We talk about all sorts of topics, but everything is related to recruiting and hiring. So again, it's an Ask Me Anything format. If you have questions you didn't get to ask today, or maybe we're just a little bit too bashful to put them into the comment section, or for that matter, deleted them after you put them in. Feel free to DM either me or Kelly with questions for not next week, but the week after. Kelly, anything else before we wrap up?
No, this is great. And I thank you to the people that have been watching us for every 2 weeks. I think this is our 4th or 5th one. So yeah, continue to send your questions over. We're happy to give you our insight and our thoughts on how we can help in interviewing, recruiting, whatever it is that you want to know.
Indeed. And on that note too, not just questions, but any ideas for themes or topics that you'd like to see us talk about. We'll take those as well. We've got plenty that we've thought of ourselves, but we're always open to suggestions. And again, the whole purpose of this is to add a little bit of value to the community. So not only questions, but also topics. All right, Kelly, thanks so much. And thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Cool. Bye.